Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. It's so great to be with you and to have this opportunity to connect and to learn together. I'm Marc Baker, CJP's President and CEO. And let me just start by thanking you not only for being here today, but for all the ways you have stepped up and shown up and supported CJP and our entire community, especially over this last year. Today, we have a unique opportunity to meet our new Consul General, Meron Reuben, to hear a little bit about his personal story and to get an update from him on the many important issues that so many of us care so much about. I have to say, I distinctly remember my first meeting with Ambassador Reuben, which I think must have been one of his first public appearances here in Boston at the Chabad Hanukkah candle lighting on Boston Common. That's an experience you never forget. I have to say it was cold and it might even have been raining, but it was evident from our very first conversation that the ambassador is going to bring to Boston not only an amazing host of experiences and incredible expertise about so many things, but just the passion and the warmth that we've come to expect from Israel's representative here in New England. Israel, of course, is on our minds right now. For so many reasons, as it always is. We're watching closely, hopefully, the formation of a government in Israel right now. We're still thinking and grieving about last week's tragedy at Mount Meron. And I just want to say our prayers continue to be with the victims and their families and the survivors and really with all the people of Israel. And we are still marveling at how Israel has become a global leader throughout this pandemic over the past year and has really been a model of the way forward for the rest of the world to open up. We're watching and we are learning from Israel as always. We are excited that the country is opening up to visitors and to tourism, including, by the way, birthright groups that we'll be sending this summer. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we just cannot wait to get back there in person. And foundational to all of this is our people-to-people relationships. First and foremost, our Boston-Haifa partnership of over 30 years and the deep connections we've made with our friends and family in Haifa. I think about the ways so many members of our community experience and connect to Israel and Israelis. We've got the IAC, the Israel-American Council, and the 30,000 Israelis here in Boston. And we have our partnership with the consulate. We stand together. We celebrate together when we need to. God forbid we mourn together. But most importantly, we always have one another's backs. We are literally and figuratively on speed dial with each other. And I'm so proud of how our community has worked closely with and built strong relationships with all of Ambassador Reuben's predecessors. We are so thrilled to welcome him here to Boston and to get to spend some time with him today. So we think the best way to get to know someone is with a kind of fireside chat, albeit a midday fireside chat. And in just a moment, I'll introduce Shira Goodman, who will be in conversation with Ambassador Reuben, and she can take your questions. I want to remind you, you can submit questions through the Q&A feature in chat, and thank you to those of you who have already submitted questions. So let me just say a word about Shira and then turn it over to her. Shira Goodman is a longtime leader at CJP in our Jewish community and beyond. As the former CEO of Staples, Shira sits on so many different boards, public, private, nonprofit, from local Jewish day schools to the Slifka Center at Yale to the Harvard University Finance Committee. And at CJP, I think it's safe to say Shira's done it all. She led our strategic planning process several years ago. She led the search process that brought me to CJP. And right now she serves as the chair of CJP's board and my closest partner in everything I do, from whom I learn so much every day. Shira, thanks for all you do for CJP and thanks for leading this conversation today.
Thank you, Marc. And it is such a pleasure to be here with Ambassador Reuben, who has been very clear that we should call him Meron. So I am going to do that, Ambassador. So I want to start off just talking about your personal story, which is so compelling. You've been a diaspora Jew, you're obviously an Israeli, you've been a private citizen, you've been a diplomat. I believe, born and raised in South Africa and the UK, which is why we love your charming accent, educated in Israel, Air Force, 5 diplomatic posts in Latin America. And my guess is your Spanish is actually quite good, as well as to the UN, and now bringing you to Boston to be our Consul General. So can you, and above all of that, being a father and a partner. So in your spare time. So can you speak to us a bit about your journey and kind of what led to what?
Well, I try not to be a partner and a father part-time. It's all the time, I presume.
Well put.
That's in the end the most important part of the family. But yes, it's been a very exciting journey. And even if I look back over my more than 33, nearly 34 years in the foreign ministry, I don't think I would do it too differently. And I think the most important thing about any job that one does, and in the end it is a job, is to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy your job, then try and find something else, because you have to put your heart and soul into it. And I think that is the most important thing when it comes to what one does. It helps you along the way. It also helps you when you don't get a very good salary, but that's definitely something that I've really enjoyed in my life. I remember when I was backpacking around the world just after the army, and I picked up a book in New Zealand that still goes with me, and the title was A Fortunate Life. And I think that I would definitely use the same title, that I've had a fortunate life, and I think that has been so good. It's about what one does, who you pick your time to be with, and how one lives one's life, because in the end it's short. I don't really believe in reincarnation, so I feel that I'm here just for one time. So enjoy the time that you've got here, and go ahead and live it.
Well, if we've learned anything from this tumultuous last year, it really is that every day is a blessing. And I'm also reminded of the adage, as you said that, which is, if you enjoy your job, you'll never work a day in your life. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, what do you enjoy most about it?
The fact that it's not a mundane job. It's a job that changes all the time. It's a job that you have the ability to put your own stamp on. You are the input into your job. And the focus, of course, there is some kind of framework, but that's what's so nice about diplomacy, is that you can put your own focus on how to do it, and where to do it, and when to do it. So yes, I think that is what is important about what I do, and that's what I enjoy about it. I don't think I'd be able to do a factory job that does the same sort of online process. I don't know all the time. Well, online is the same process, or the
I hear you.
Yeah, everything at the same time.
So it's actually quite entrepreneurial. So I've been following your Twitter, and like you were in Lowell on Earth Day, you were in East Hampton talking about business.
Lawrence.
Sorry, Lawrence and Lowell are right next to each other. But yes, look, at your New England geography is better than mine already. And so, can you tell us why this is such, and that was clearly, you putting your imprint on it. Why has that been such an important undertaking to you to go out into the community?
Well, I think that's what diplomacy is all about. Diplomacy is about meeting people. Diplomacy is about being on the ground and reporting back to whoever needs to be talked to and told about what goes on. There have been people who say that modern technology will replace diplomacy, and that all you need is a telephone call or a Zoom meeting, but it's not the same. Maybe I shouldn't use the military term, but boots on the ground is a lot better and a lot more important when it comes to reporting back. And there's nothing that beats personal relationships. As a diplomat, one has to make up and make your personal relationships. I think that's one of the more difficult portions of our job, is that because every time you arrive at a place and you start to put down your roots and you start to make the relationships, you immediately have to go off again. So yes, it is a problem. My mother always used to say that the first 3 years are just the beginning, and only after 3 years do you really begin to feel you're at home. So as a diplomat who usually is anywhere between 2 and 4 years in one's place, one has to do the settling down and putting down your roots very, very quickly. And that's why I've tried to be in as many places as possible. Unfortunately, only mainly in 2 dimensions. But yes, it's very, very important to get to know the people, to get to know the place, to get to know what life is all about, because it's different wherever you go. I mean, it's even different between different areas of Massachusetts, let alone New England. And I have the 6 states, northeastern states, under my jurisdiction for the state of Israel. And there are quite a lot of differences between the states.
Absolutely. So did you specifically have a preference to come to the United States or even to New England in particular? Or was it just kind of luck of the draw?
No, I must admit that I did focus in on Boston and New England, maybe because of the motto that I see on so many lawns, that love is love. And I presume that that I think was the most important part of why I chose New England, for the fact that it has a more live and let live focus than other parts of the world. And you know, I'm in the heyday of my diplomatic career. As I say to quite a few people, I'm put out to pasture at the age of 67. So I only have just over 7.5 years before I am forced to retire from the civil service. So yes, I definitely chose a place that I felt would be very warm and welcoming, and at the same time would allow me to live my life the way I like to live it.
That's fantastic. So let me just build on that. So, you know, one of the top initiatives at CJP these days, we're spending a lot more time on it, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And obviously this is a big topic across America, and we're really spending time thinking through what does it mean for CJP's work internally, what does it mean for the Boston Jewish community, what does it mean for our investments in the community. And, you know, we really think of that very broadly. It could be you know, BIPOC, it could be Jews of color, LGBTQ community, even younger adults sometimes add diversity to CJP events. So when you look at like Israel versus the United States and the whole idea of being a diverse society, what lessons do you think we can learn from Israel and vice versa?
Well, there's so many cross lines there, both in the American society and in the Israeli society, and then between the 2 societies, that it's very difficult to know which line to draw and how many lines to draw, but there are definitely hundreds of them. I think, you know, there are a lot of focuses that have to be done. And I think that as Rabbi Baker said, when you want to go back to Israel, because Israel is such an exciting place. It can also sometimes be an annoying place, but it's definitely exciting. You never really are satisfied. I think that's very much what one also says. I think if you delve into the Bible, you will see that even God wasn't exactly ecstatic with the Jewish people, and he said that they're a stiff-necked people. You know, I think that we are, after all, a society that's never satisfied with what it has. And I think that that is the underpinning point when it comes to both Israeli society and Jewish society all over the world. One always asks, why have Jews always been so successful? And I think because that's the underlying tone of being part of the Jewish people. And that is that the Jewish people are never satisfied with what they've got, and they always want to improve. But it's not only improving their own lot, they want to improve the lot of all those around them as well. And I think that that is some of the things that are definitely the same in the two societies. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that the two societies really understand one another properly. When the Israeli comes to the United States, he doesn't really understand it. Because growing up, let's just look at Jewish society. I think if you see what goes on in Israel, you live an Israeli life or a Jewish life because the state is a Jewish state. So on Friday night, you will hear Shabbat Shalom from your TV. And on Saturday, the majority of the shops are not open. And when it is Passover, the supermarkets will cover the shelves that have got non-kosher Pesach foods in them. And if you really want to buy them, you've got to tear the paper away and push your hand behind there and then try and buy it. Or go to an Arab village which will be selling bread, for example. But yes, a pitot. But your life is also, you don't have to belong to a synagogue, you don't have to belong to a JCC, you don't have to belong to a Jewish school to get your Judaism. And also the streams of religion are quite different in Israel because you get your religious services from the ultra-Orthodox community. Whether this was a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, and was this one of Ben-Gurion's major mistakes not to separate the state from religion? Well, we're living with it at the moment. Whereas in the United States, maybe that's something that we should learn, and we should have learned from the United States decades ago, that actual separation. But yet the American Jewish community, as we see it, comes to Israel and is actually very surprised, by the cultural diversity that exists in Israel, and in the end also by the racial diversity that exists in Israel. Because the majority of the American Jewish community comes from Central or Eastern Europe, or its roots thereof. And then, as you mentioned, or as Marc Baker mentioned, the new Israeli Americans. A lot of people have said, but why do you differentiate between the Jewish community and the Israeli Americans? But there is a difference. First and foremost, because the Jewish community mainly came in the 19th and early 20th century to the United States and has already had over a century plus of assimilation and of becoming American, whereas the Israeli diaspora, which is of course Jewish, and today makes up some 10% of the Jews of North America, is a relatively new wave of immigration. It's a wave of immigration that doesn't always see its Jewish life focused in a synagogue or a center or anything like that, or a school. So yes, there is this slight dichotomy between the two, and so there we have to build new lines between us. And of course, in the New England area, we have a very large concentration of Israeli companies, which is something different to other Israeli groups in the United States, except for those in the Silicon Valley. So after Silicon Valley, Greater Boston has the largest concentration of Israeli high-tech companies. So yes, it's a very interesting a community that is beginning to crystallize, shall I say, in this area. And it's something that has to definitely be learned because there's not always too much contact between everybody.
Yeah, and there's, when you're talking, to your point, it's such a broad topic. We'd have to have a whole nother conversation just about it. But, two thoughts that came to mind for me is, as Marc said, a lot of our work is people to people. So every single year pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, we'll have groups of students And from the Haifa schools, they come here, and from here they go to the Haifa schools. And very often it's over Simchat Torah. And you have Israelis from like Riali who have never celebrated Simchat Torah in a shul. You know, maybe they're bike riding on the streets, whatever, but they've never celebrated in shul. And they're like, this is kind of fun. And then on the flip side of it, as you were talking, I was thinking about, you know, progress. And probably if you go back, and you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you go back a couple generations, it was probably more controversial for an Ashkenazi to marry a Sephardi in Israel. And now it's commonplace. It doesn't even, you know, really raise an eyebrow. So we can only hope that over time we could have better integration like that in the United States as well.
Oh, I think so, yes. Well, my partner is half Yemenite and half Moroccan, so yes.
There you go. See? Exactly. Point made. So let's move on a little bit to some of the kind of issues of the day. So I heard you were behind the scenes when the UAE made the historic visit to Israel in 2020 as part of the Abraham Accords. If you could just, you know, give us a little bit of your personal perspective on that, and what do you see as Israel's place in the Middle East as it's emerging today?
Well, I think that was a very important move on the side of both American diplomacy and Israel. It is definitely one of the most major changes that we've seen in the Middle East in the last quarter of a century. And I think that what we see in the Abraham Accords and the normalization agreements that we have both with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and also moving ahead with Sudan, is the fact that the countries around the region are beginning to act according to what they've been saying behind the scenes for decades. And this change in focus and the acceptance, or a more broader acceptance of Israel into the fold of the Middle East, is something where we have always wanted to be as part and parcel of the region. And secondly, I think it also sends a message to our neighbors, the Palestinians, to also maybe pull up their socks and start trying to focus differently. Instead of blaming Israel for every single thing that happens to them, then maybe try and pick themselves up and move themselves forward. I mean, I found that as ambassador of the United Nations, Israel is really the scapegoat of the world, especially the scapegoat for governments who are not doing very much for their people. And it's always easy to blame somebody else for your problems. And I think that is something that is very important. It's an important lesson maybe that will come out of the Abraham Accords, because in the end, the people who have most to gain from the Abraham Accords are actually the Palestinians. They are the ones who live next to us. They are the ones who speak Hebrew. They don't have to learn Hebrew like the Arabs in the United Arab Emirates. They already speak Hebrew. They work in Israel. A lot of them do anyway. 130,000 cross over from Judea and Samaria or the West Bank every day to work in Israel. And they have also been, by the way, vaccinated thanks to an Israeli drive to vaccinate some of the Palestinians. So yes, they could definitely be that bridge between Israel and the Arab world. They work with our technologies. They understand us better than most. Sometimes they understand us better than we understand ourselves. But yes, I think they could definitely be there at the forefront. And at the moment, they're not. And I would definitely hope that we would see some kind of change coming about in how the Palestinians look at Israel and themselves in the greater Middle East, instead of always saying we can't do anything because we're not to blame for our situation.
Well, you know, the Israeli anthem is Hatikva, the hope, and I share your optimism that this could really be the unlock that we've been looking for with to really help the relationships between the Palestinians and Israel. So well put, fingers crossed. We'll see kind of where this goes. Hot off the press, literally, we couldn't have timed this conversation better. President Rivlin has asked Lapid to form a government. So help us understand the ramifications of this news. Are we on the verge of new leadership in Israel after more than a decade of Likud? Kind of how are we to understand this?
It's been more than a decade, but actually the Likud has really been in power most of the period from 1977. When Menachem Begin won the elections. Sometimes the people in the Likud party themselves don't really realize that they've actually been in power for 45 years, but or the majority of the time during those last 45 years. But I would say hold your horses to that one, Shira, because it's not over till the fat lady sings, of course. Though I think that wouldn't be PC in this region. I'll say it's not over till the opera lady sings.
There you go.
Okay,
wonderful.
there we go. I'm trying to learn a new language.
We all are. You can get caught so easy these days.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. You never know what word is going to be misunderstood or will misrepresent you here in, especially in New England. But yes, we still have time. Yair Lapid is the second largest party in the Knesset. Yesh Atid has 17 members as opposed to Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party with 30 members. And he will have quite a tough time to form a government, and he might not even put his name down first as the person who would be the first choice for prime minister. So, he might be going, as I'm sure you've read in the newspapers, might even suggest that Naftali Bennett, who comes from a very small party, the New Right party, would maybe form the government as prime minister, so even though he only has 7 members of parliament. But there are some 14 parties in the Knesset at the moment out of 120, so that's really quite stunning. It means that, as usual, as always been, you need a coalition government in Israel. Actually, modern Israel has never had anything but coalition governments because no one party has ever received a majority of the seats. The closest that ever came was when the Labour Party, then called Marc, got 56 seats. But they never got 60, and they always needed a coalition. So now the largest party is 30, second largest is 17, and then all the other parties are under 10 seats.
Wow.
So yes, it is going to be quite a difficult job for anyone to set up a government. What might happen is that there might be a minority government with parties supporting that minority government from outside. That, of course, doesn't always create a stable government because it means that the moment the parties outside the government vote against you or don't prop up the government can collapse. So yes, it is a little bit of a problem, but our system is proportionate representation. It's something slightly different to the American citizen system. It's something that the Americans don't always understand. I'm not sure that we always understand what goes on, but yes, it's not an easy task to form a government, especially with the division of seats that exist today in the Knesset. Yair Lapid now has his 3.5 weeks to try and form the government, and we will see what he manages to do. There have been talks, I think, prior to receiving the job from President Rivlin, and we will see.
Well, I think if we've learned one thing in humility for the America as well, is there's no perfect government and there's no perfect structure. Israel might have too many parties. The US might be served well by having a third party. So who knows? So best of luck. Hopefully there won't be a 5th election.
Yes, but we're both vibrant democracies, and I think that's the most important.
Well put. That's why you're the diplomat. Very well put. We got a question in the text to ask you a little bit about your positions and your experience in Latin America. And what were the Jewish communities there like? And what was the role of the Israeli consulate in those countries? So you might just elaborate which countries you were in and a little bit of your experience there.
Okay, well, I was the number 2 in Mexico. I was the number 2 in Chile. I was Israel's ambassador to Paraguay in Asuncion. I was Israel's last resident ambassador in La Paz, Bolivia, and I was Israel's ambassador in Bogota, Colombia. So I really do feel that I have Latin blood in me, and I definitely feel a great affinity for Latin America and for the Western Hemisphere as well, because as you can understand, I've actually served only in the Western Hemisphere, North, Central, and South America. So yes, I do really feel part of this wonderful continent. The Jewish communities of Latin America are relatively small. The 2 larger communities are the Argentinian one and the Brazilian one. But in comparison, of course, to the size of the population of those countries, it is still relatively small. And the communities are growing smaller, except for, I think, Panama. But that's thanks to an influx of Jews from the dying community of Venezuela and other communities. So Panama, I think, is the only Jewish community that has really grown over the last decade or 2. So yes, in some ways it's not easy. In other ways, we have a very, very good relationship with Latin America, with most of the governments of Latin America. And this has been a relationship for the 73 plus years of Israel's existence. And I think that's why we have such a lot of embassies dotted around the continent. Our relationships are very good. They also have a tendency to fluctuate. Today we have a budding relationship with Brazil, and yet 15, 20 years ago, the relationship was a strained relationship. But yes, there are some very interesting focuses that go on in Latin America. Trade with Latin America is unfortunately very small. It's only about 4 to 5% of Israel's total trade. But we do have a lot of collaboration, cooperation, international cooperation, and we definitely have relatively a lot of political visits from the continent in comparison to the distance that we are from Latin America. Yes.
What % of Israel's trade is with the United States?
Approximately a third of Israel's trade is with the United States. Well, it's less. It's about 27%, just under 30%. And then you have about a third of the Israel's trade is with Asia and a third with Europe. So yes, we sort of are quite well divided when it comes to trade with the 3 major blocks.
And is it fair to assume that it's really growing in Asia?
Yes, it's definitely growing in Asia. I think you can see that we have a very, very special relationship and have had with India. And that includes, of course, just lately, the last 2-3 days, we've been sending a lot of medical equipment to India, especially focused on oxygen generators and respirators to address, some of the needs. We can't address all the needs of a population which is 1.4 billion people, but we are trying our best. And I think that we have seen a very intriguing improvement and a very special improvement between Israel and India, both on the high-tech side, on the agricultural side, even I don't know if you know, but the Nan company, or the Nan Dan company, which started drip irrigation, was actually bought out by an Indian company called Jan. So it's JAN. So yes, they have bought into Israel's high tech, and I think both the Japanese and of course the Chinese are all interested in what goes on in Israel. We do have some very good relations when it comes to the Asian countries. Maybe less so when it comes to the Western Asian countries, but definitely very good relations with countries from Azerbaijan through to Japan, throughout Asia. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard folks say that actually India, if you meet folks in India, they think Israel is a much bigger country because there's so many kids after their military duty who travel through India.
I think that happens
restaurants, all in Hebrew, etc.
Yes, all over. Also in Latin America, you'll find backpackers. Usually after military service, I did the same thing. Put on a backpack and off I went for more than a year, going from country to country, and it really is an exciting time of one's life, and it opens up one's eyes to what the world is. I think maybe that is one of the reasons why I think I joined the Foreign Service. Also, I was in a boarding school in England where there were quite a few children of diplomats, and I was in boarding school when Idi Amin threw out the British diplomats and the Asian community out of Uganda. That tells my age, of course. But then after the army, I went backpacking around the world, and I did go around the world. Actually, I flew Pan Am around the world from west to east.
There you go. That's a walk down memory lane there. Let's fast forward. Let's talk about a tougher topic, which is anti-Semitism. As you well know, really on the rise in the U.S. and including here in Boston. And I noticed a couple of weeks ago you were actually in conversation with our Attorney General Maura Healey on it. What is the role of the consulate to help us combat anti-Semitism?
Well, the role of the consulate is first and foremost to be on the lookout and to see what is going on in the society and in the United States. We're not the only ones. We receive a lot of help from Jewish organizations like the ADL and many other organizations like the CJP and other organizations as well, who are very worried about where the ramifications of what happens and what is happening with anti-Semitism. I actually co-authored an article with the German Consul General here on Holocaust Day about the importance of teaching the Holocaust in the schools of New England. I think it's very, very important. It's important not just so that the younger generation understands, especially as the generation of the Holocaust, those who have first-hand experience are unfortunately dying out because of old age. It is incredibly important that the younger generation understands what can happen when we talk about man's inhumanity to man. And I think that is why it is so important that we definitely focus in on what's going on and the anti-Semitism that exists here and the root causes of it, because I think that education in the end is a way to change the way people see what is going on, and first and foremost to learn about what happened. A lot of people, I always say that I have two very difficult audiences. One of the more difficult audiences are the retirees, who have plenty of time to read up and usually are much better acquainted with the subject than you yourself are. And then you have the younger generation. And in the younger generation, anything over 6 months to 2 years is ancient history. If you're 18, you don't remember really back. You can't really. I mean, I have met some 18-year-olds who definitely have an unbelievable knowledge of what goes on, but even long before they were around. But without education and without instilling the education, it doesn't come from osmosis. You don't just learn it by putting your head on a pillow. It has to be taught. And so what happened to the Jewish people during and before the Second World War, and what happened to the Jewish people throughout Western civilization and history is actually a very, very important lesson for understanding the necessity to stop xenophobia. It's not only to stop anti-Semitism. It's to stop Islamophobia. It's to stop, Asian hate. It's to stop black hate. It's to stop all these things, and that is what is so important about the focus on anti-Semitism. So we do try and understand what is happening in the region, where it's going, and we try to work in conjunction both with local politicians and local academia and schools, etc., to put it on the map as a subject that is very, very important and close to our hearts, and that we think should be dealt with.
Yeah, there's also, I don't know if you've met them yet, but a national organization based here in Boston, Facing History, that obviously does tremendous work in that area. I'm going to turn to some of our questions because they are coming in, and a reminder to folks to send them in. One is on China, which is really interesting. Does Israel view China's technological and military expansion around the world with the same reservation as does the US in terms of intellectual property and crackdowns?
No, I don't think so. I think that the Chinese are definitely trying to get our technology, and we are in collaboration with the United States. We have definitely many agreements that are signed with the United States that if there are any components of American technology in Israeli technology, it cannot just be exported willy-nilly, as they say, without consulting the United States, etc. So yes, I think that we are wary. I think the Americans have made their focus very, very clear to Israeli politicians and to the Israeli high-tech industry, and I think that we do understand the necessity not to sell any technology to anybody. It definitely has to be important, and I think that you have to be focused, and we must make sure that not everybody gets all of the technology. Yes,
doesn't fall in the wrong hands. Yep.
Yeah.
There's another question here about how might we in the greater Boston Jewish community integrate and interact with the Israeli community better. That goes back to one of your earlier points today. Through every synagogue, business group, how do we integrate better?
Well, first and foremost, you're doing an excellent job here in the greater Boston area when it comes to the Boston-Haifa connection. And you've also got in Western Massachusetts and in Connecticut and Rhode Island, the Afula-Gilboa connection. So yes, there are some wonderful programs that are already going on in the region that are and should be or should continue, and I think that is one way of connecting. Secondly, if you're looking for something closer to home, is the growing Israeli diaspora here in the region. It's about 25 to 30,000 in the greater Boston area. And that one can see by the work that we have here in the consulate, and yes, this is something that is always good to reach out to the different people and to understand what is going on. So keep up the good work, and B, there are always things to be done here in the region based on things that are already in existence that are going on. One can also, do other things and focus on other points. But there are so many wonderful programs that are going on that it's really easy to choose if you really want to dive into added connections with both Israel and Israelis and people who are here as well in the diaspora.
Right. And, you know, I would also say for folks in their professional lives, I know, again, personally, it always gives me great joy when I'm able to, you know, support an Israeli company, whether it's through biz dev or, you know, talent, finding new talent, etc. So, you know, there's so many companies here and so much back and forth on the business end of things. Different type of question. You had mentioned earlier that Israel vaccinated the 130,000 Palestinian workers who work in Israel. What about, question is, what is Israel's policy strategy in terms of helping with vaccinations for, you know, other Palestinians?
Well, the policy is first and foremost to be in conjunction and to coordinate things with the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority, which was set up in the 1990s, is responsible for the health of the Palestinian people, which means the Palestinian Ministry of Health, as it is called, has to deal with the Palestinian entity as a whole. In the very beginning, they were very reticent and they didn't want Israel's help. And they said, we are connected with the World Health Organization and with the United Nations, and we are part and parcel of other connections to deal with COVID-19. I think in the end, when they saw the successes of the Israeli rollout, they began to maybe feel that they'd gone down the wrong path. A lot of the complaints actually came from this area in the United States, which I found rather strange, especially due to the fact that the United States at the time itself hadn't got its act together. But I'm happy to see that now the United States has got its act together and is beginning to close the gap between Israel and the United States in the amount of people vaccinated and also stretching out a helping hand. But I think even in the United States, they are focused first and foremost on their own population, exactly like every other country is focused first and foremost on their own population. So I think that what Israel has done so far, we have not stopped the vaccinations coming through. There have been both the Chinese vaccination, the Russian vaccination has come in, and even some AstraZeneca has come into the Palestinian Authority, and they are dependent on their health services. And Israel, if you look at the size of the population, has given out a lot of vaccinations, and I'm sure we will give out more. But you must realize that when a country signs an accord with the private vaccination companies, you cannot re-export or give them out to other countries. There was an idea that Israel would give out vaccinations to other countries, not only in the area of the Middle East, but the companies themselves were not exactly ecstatic with the idea of Israel re-exporting the vials of vaccination to other countries. It also took us some time to allow the United States to let us bring in vaccinations for the Israeli diplomats in North America. I received my second vaccination in the Israeli consulate in New York. So yes, we have vaccinated all of our own diplomats, but we had to get the authority of the United Nations to bring the vaccinations into the United States, of course.
Wow, really interesting. Thank you. So another question that has come in has to do with kind of just students and generally the younger generation. And you know that very often their attitude towards Israel might not be as positive as everyone who is on this Zoom with you, and a little bit conflicted about it. How do you see your role in terms of reaching out to whether it's younger generation or just, folks across the community whose ideas around Israel might not be, in sync with,
Well, I don't think everybody's ideas need to be in sync with what the Israeli government thinks, but I do want people to understand what's going on in Israel, and I think that is one of the focuses that I am trying to bring with me. Is that people don't automatically attack Israel, but if they want to say something, say it out of knowledge, and not just out of ignorance. And I think that this is something that we are facing. I've heard all sorts of things since I've been here, even people who say that birthright is too late, and it's forced out the school systems whereby high schools children used to all go to Israel in the beginning, and now we're waiting too long to take people to Israel, and they're getting there once their ideas have been formulated without really seeing what's going on in the ground. There are pluses to this side and pluses to that side.
Yeah.
Well, I've started with kindergarten schools, and I read Israeli stories to kindergartens in and around Massachusetts and New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, New England. Sorry. So yes, I think there's no group that's too young or no group that's too old to be mentioned and or to deal with. But yes, there is a problem, especially when students come into academia and then are faced with questions and verbal attacks that they don't always realize or know how to deal with. So yes, but there are some very, very good programs that exist, whether it's the Hillels or whether it is other organizations like Stand With Us and other groups that one can really go to get information about how to answer some of the questions and how to deal with some of the questions. I sometimes find it rather strange that people of the Jewish nation, because we in the end are a Jewish nation and not only a religion, that's the way I see it anyway, have a tendency to shoot themselves in the foot from the very beginning. I mean, one only has to look at some of the older generation, whether it's how people change their tune. Whether it's even so-called modern historians like Benny Morris, who had a lot to say about Israel in its independence, and then over the last decade has changed his tune totally when it comes to the new history of Israel. So yes, it's actually very, very interesting to see how people change and what happens when things are changed. So sometimes it's very important to understand a little bit more of what is going on, what Israel is being so-called accused of, and being able to answer how to deal with some of the attacks, which I think are not always accurate.
Right. It all goes back to education again. So let me close.
I'll just add another thing. You can see what happened in the Goldstein report from more than a decade ago, where we were sort of a so-called fact-finding mission of the Goldstein report, where we were chastised by Mr. Goldstein, who wrote the report in the end, backtracked some years later and said that, of course, it was mainly political and politically focused and not really based on what should have been based. But he in the end expressed his regrets about writing it, but it had already been written and the damage had already been done. So yes, I think that these are things that have to be understood. The same thing that we're facing in other arenas around the world.
So For my closing question, Meron, you have close to 100 Friends of Israel on this Zoom call today. And my question is, what is your one ask of the Boston Jewish community? What would it be?
Well, I think it would be to continue to stay involved. I think that the moment you continue to be involved, you are involved and you stay involved, I think that is the most important thing, and to know and understand what one's talking about. Today in the information age, there is so much information that in the end we're ignorant. Because we don't always know where to take the information from, how to take it, why to take it, and when to take it. And yes, had I just read every single piece of news that came into this consulate every day, I wouldn't get off my chair for a full 24 hours every single day. So yes, in the end, one has to learn from whence to take the information, how to take the information, and how to maybe look at things. So sometimes Shira, you'll say, "Oh, but didn't you see that?" And I said, "No, I didn't see it," because there is so much out there that it's very difficult to cope with what goes on. But I definitely would suggest that those who are here would continue their involvement and bring other people into the fold. I think that that's very important. And there is so much on-offing that you can definitely find a niche for yourself. And I think that that's the most important message that I would say.
Thank you. So stay involved, stay informed, and bring others in.
Correct.
So we so welcome you to Boston. We look forward to when we can do this in person. I have to say, on a personal level, I want to thank you. As you know, I am off to Israel tomorrow, God willing. And I was able to see the Israeli consulate do some of its more practical work in terms of getting me the permission to go there, which is just a standard operating procedure, but it was wonderful to see it. So hopefully I will come back and bring good tidings from Israel. And before you know it, we will have our usual plane loads of folks going to Israel.
Well, thank you, Shira. I just want to say, I'm sorry to interject before you finish, but it's not standard operational focus at the moment because we are only now coming out of COVID-19. There are specific requests that are made, and at the moment you can only go to Israel if you are visiting first-degree relatives. As of the 23rd of May, you will be able to go in group visits to Israel, and as of June, we will most probably go back to individual tourism to Israel without the necessity to visit first-degree relatives. So yes, there are still a lot of rules and regulations, and those rules and regulations will be changing. When we do give out an authorization to visit Israel, it's only valid for 2 weeks. So if you're planning a trip in June or July, don't even bother to come to the consulate at the moment, because maybe by the time July rolls around, you won't need to have a specific letter or anything to come to Israel. So just follow some of the information that is put out so that you understand where we come, and enjoy Israel. I'm sure you will.
Yes, well, my father lives there. That's how come I got under the first degree rule, but you're right. But the procedure for the first degree relatives was very clear and well done. And we look forward to June. I know there's so many folks who are eager to get back to our beloved Eretz Yisrael. And we're also eager to meet you and personally welcome you in our homes. So thank you again, Lehitraot, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Wonderful participation. And Meron, you can see you've got some thank yous in Spanish as well. So again, welcome to our community. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.